welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Cho. U.S. officials expressed strong concern and disappointment over the Moon administration's withdrawal from the General Security of Military Information Agreement with Japan. What will be the impact on the U.S.-ROK alliance?
We're disappointed to see the decision that the South Koreans made about that information sharing agreement.
Look, we have common threats facing us, North Korea and China, and bigger threats, and we're stronger when we all work together.
우리의 지소미아 종료 조치에 대해 실망을 표명하는 것을 이해할 수 있으며, 그러니까 우리가 이해할 수 있다는 겁니다.
In the studio with me today, Mr. Dennis Wilder, professor at the Georgetown University. Mr. Wilder was Senior Director for East Asian Affairs at the National Security Council and spent more than 3 decades at the CIA. Also joining me, Mr. David Maxwell, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Mr. Maxwell is a retired U.S. Army Special Forces Colonel with assignments in Korea. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Professor, let me begin with you. So, high-level U.S. officials, including Secretaries of Defense and State, expressed a strong concern and disappointment over South Korea's termination of Jisomia and even called out explicitly on the Moon administration. So do you think this is the highest level of criticism to an ally?
Well, it's definitely a high level of criticism. I think you have to remember the history of this, that we worked very hard on the U.S. side to get both Japan and South Korea to agree to the Jisomia a few years ago. It was a hard-fought agreement. We feel it's very important, both symbolically and operationally. And for the South Koreans to seemingly throw this away so sort of cavalierly was a shock to the American system, and one that really speaks volumes about where President Moon is in his thinking on the trilateral relationship. And so this is a big problem, and America is going to continue to criticize this.
So, Colonel Maxwell, State Department pointed out that the Moon administration, it was its misapprehension over the security threat in Northeast Asia. So, what kind of misapprehension was this?
Yes, well, I think that it certainly weakens the alliance and weakens our military capabilities. The direct sharing of information between Korea and Japan without the U.S. being a middleman actually enhances the security of all 3 countries. And so by backing out of the Jisomia, information sharing now occurs like it used to in the past through the U.S., which is naturally slower and of course will reduce the efficiency of military operations. So this decision has a military impact, although we should keep in mind that the ability of U.S. and South Korean forces to deter and defend South Korea is not significantly diminished. And the military capabilities remain strong.
And State Department pointed out that U.S. forces in South Korea may also be impacted. So what kind of impacts do you anticipate?
Well, the most important impact is early warning of North Korean attack. Now, of course, we have intelligence capabilities to watch for that, but so does Japan. And South Korea has lesser capability. And so the combined intelligence capabilities of the U.S., Japan, and South Korea really bring strength to the process. And either one may observe the indications and warning of an impending attack, or they provide second source confirmation of potential military operations. So it's important that this information is shared rapidly. And because of the presence of U.S. forces in South Korea, if there is any attack, U.S. forces are at risk.
And Professor Wilder, contrary to South Korea's public statements, the State Department said it never expressed understanding of South Korea's decision. And Assistant Secretary of Defense Shriver said that South Korea never gave prior notice to the United States. So do you think the incorrect messaging from the South Korean government also aggravated the situation?
Well, I think as an ally of the United States, you would hope that the South Korean government, whenever they made a major decision that has an impact on the security of American forces in Korea, would have a consultation before they do such an action. And that, again, makes you wonder about the Moon government's commitment to the alliance, what they might do in the future unilaterally without consultation with us. We make a huge commitment to South Korea and South Korea's defense. We station 27,000 troops in South Korea. We think that as a government that has shown such a commitment to the defense of the South Korean people, that we are owed a little more than what the Moon government gave us in this case.
Mm-hmm. And talking about allies relationships, South Korea's vice foreign minister called for a meeting with Ambassador Harris and asked Ambassador Harris for United States to refrain from public criticism on South Korea's decision. So what do you make of South Korea's such request to the United States?
I can understand why South Korea doesn't want to be criticized by its most important ally publicly. That is perfectly understandable, but it is a little bit of a reach on the part of the South Koreans to believe that something as important as the breaking of the Jisomia agreement would not be something the United States would comment on. American public would be asking the administration questions about this. The reporters would ask, does the South Korean government want a no comment statement out of the U.S. government? I think it is well within the rights of the U.S. government to explain where they stand on this issue. And so I'm a little perplexed the South Korean government would think that's an appropriate request of the U.S. side.
Mm-hmm. So earlier on, you mentioned how the trilateral information sharing agreement is ineffective, less effective than the Jisomia. And what are Japan's strength in intelligence gathering?
Well, certainly, like the U.S., they have a good satellite coverage of the North. And of course, the other thing is that we really don't talk publicly about the intelligence capabilities of all three countries. But I think it's fair to say that we have complementary capabilities, we have overlapping capabilities, and many of these capabilities fill the gaps of the others. And that's why the strength of the three is greater than any one of the parts. And so I think that South Korea has capabilities with relations with North Korea, and Japan has technical capabilities, and they both complement each other.
If I may, I want to add on this because I was chief of analysis for East Asia at the CIA. One of the things you're always worried about is, does somebody have a piece of the puzzle that you don't have? And are your partners providing you with their pieces? 9/11 could have been stopped if the FBI and the CIA had shared some critical information with each other, according to the U.S. Congress's after action report. And I agree that there was critical information that wasn't shared between government agencies. Well, now we're talking about not sharing information between governments. And so you don't know what you're missing. And if there's a critical piece of intelligence that the Japanese have, that the South Koreans need, or the South Koreans need that the Japanese have, and we're not sharing it, you could miss something major.
So we're going to talk about China later on in this discussion, but what does North Korea got to gain from the termination of Jisomia?
Well, I think on the diplomatic front, they have to be very happy with this situation, because what it says is the alliance is unraveling a bit. And of course, they are very worried about a trilateral alliance. If you can separate, divide and conquer is the term often used for this, I would think that the North Koreans see an opportunity in this situation.
The State Department also expressed concerns about South Korea's latest large exercises around the Liancourt Rocks, also called as Dokdo. So the United States didn't make much comments about this disputed territorial issues before. So what do you make of this latest concern expressed from the State Department?
Yes, this is very problematic. We have long tried to stay out of this, the territorial dispute between Korea and Japan, because once we make a comment, we will be appearing to take sides. And I think the Koreans have interpreted our recent comment as taking the other side on this, and they have been, responded very. I think actually criticism of Tokdo generates greater feeling in Korea than the criticism of the withdrawal from the Jisomiya. And I think we as Americans don't understand that and how important that is to Korea as well as Japan. So we've generally tried to stay out of that. But I think given the frustrations over the Jisomiya and the threats in Northeast Asia, particularly the recent incursions by China and Russia in the area, in the KDIS, and so I think that our comments there were really generated out of frustration with the Jisomiya, and the exercise following so closely to that really does harm the trilateral cooperation of the three allies.
So on this issue of taking sides, where the United States is not taking any sides, but the Blue House said that it is Japan which undermined the trilateral relationship with Japan's economic revenge on South Korea. And how is it received? Japan and South Korea pointing fingers at each other. How is this being received in Washington?
I think there's actually some puzzlement in Washington over the way that these two sides are behaving. We know there are a lot of historical issues, that there are historical animosities between the two countries, and certainly there are reasons going back to World War II for some of these animosities. However, we put history in the United States behind us on these issues, such as World War II. And we're, I think, sometimes perplexed that this still seems to have such a huge resonance in both societies. So, some people can accuse the United States of sort of ignoring history, and maybe we are guilty of that at times, but sometimes if you live too much in the past, you get into situations like this. And so I think what we would like to see our allies do in East Asia is try to put this history behind them as best they can, and try and find, obviously, ways to deal with the territorial and other issues that have come up.
Assistant Secretary of Defense Shriver called on South Korea to reverse its decision to terminate Jisomiya before it is expired in November. And South Korean Prime Minister also hinted that this could be possible. So what do you think are the chances that South Korea will take this road? And how important is this decision at this time?
I think it's very important, as we've outlined, for national security. But whether it will happen or not is really a function of two people, President Moon and Prime Minister Abe. Both of them need to exercise real leadership. Both of them need to put national security and national prosperity ahead of these emotional, historical issues. And that is really the only way out of this. They have to demonstrate leadership and really have to go against their domestic political constituencies and set those aside for the good of both countries and really the good of all three countries.
Before we go, I want both your opinions. So Professor Wilder and Colonel Maxwell, is the US-ROK alliance now reaching dangerous levels?
I wouldn't go that far yet, but I think this is a step down that road. And I think that we have a lot of complicated issues to deal with. We have the issue of burden sharing that's coming up again. There are many things here. And so I think this is a warning signal that we should all take. This is a canary in the coal mine situation where clearly we're not on the same page right now, and we need to get back together.
I think we are potentially heading towards a perfect storm with negative conditions. However, the analogy for an alliance is like a marriage, and there are ups and downs in a marriage. When you look at the history of the alliance, we've been through some difficult times. Various administrations have had differing views in the past, and we've worked through them. But if it is like a marriage, we really need some counseling, and we really have to talk and work together and remember what the alliance is based on.
Well, we'll surely have to work through this. We'll leave it here and watch video for our next discussion.
Thank you.
70年来中朝关系的发展可能要引领两国关系在新时代要指明一个方向。
我们支持日韩双方借这次外长会的契机，
North Korea and China continue high-level exchanges marking the 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations. The latest in the series of visits is Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to North Korea. Now, Colonel Maxwell, what will be Foreign Minister Wang Yi's biggest agenda? Last year he was there in May, and soon after Chairman Kim visited Dalian. So is he there again to set up the logistics, or will he be there to discuss denuclearization?
Probably both. I'm sure we'll probably hear some kind of public statement from China that they support denuclearization and they urge both sides to talk. I think that's how they will put it diplomatically. But it is likely that they are setting up a future meeting. What I think is interesting is that these are foreign ministry meetings, and in the past, as I understand it, they've really been more party to party. And I think this is part of North Korea's coming out. I think China may be supporting the enhanced reputation of Kim Jong-un and North Korea and trying to help normalize its reputation in the world, which, of course, also supports the new constitution that was just approved. So,
Professor Wilder, in the last couple of months, North Korea conducted a series of short-range ballistic missiles, and China remained quite quiet. And what do you make of China's inaction?
Well, you know, it's very interesting. I read over the Chinese spokesperson's announcement of the Wang Yi visit. And one thing that struck me in there was a statement that the situation on the peninsula had de-escalated. Now, I don't see what de-escalation the Chinese are talking about. And I think somebody needs to press the Chinese on why would you say that the situation has improved in recent times when, as you say, we have these provocative missile firings by the North Korean leader. So I think China is trying to set up a charade here that somehow the situation on the peninsula is in a better place than it has been. I think that serves China's interest because China really doesn't want these talks to go very far. They like the current situation on the peninsula. They keep the North Koreans on sort of a drip, if you will, of aid, but never allowing them to go too far. So I think the Chinese are very happy with the current state of affairs, but I think we should be very skeptical of a Chinese statement that you know, it's because of a de-escalation.
Mm-hmm. So, Professor Wilder, after President Xi's visit to North Korea, there was economic packages to North Korea, 800,000 tons of rice, and beefing up the number of Chinese travelers to 5 million. So what do you make of President Xi's present to North Korea?
Well, remember that China has actually gotten out of the negotiations what it wanted. What were the two things that China wanted? Number one, they wanted the nuclear test site at Pyongyang to be shut down. It was close to the Chinese border. There was a danger of radiation both in the air and in the water, underground water supplies. They wanted that facility shut. What's the first thing that Kim does? He shuts down that facility. Secondly, they wanted the long-range missile testing over Japan stopped because they realized that was destabilizing. And of course, at one point, President Trump very clearly stated that this could lead to military conflict. So really, China's goals diplomatically have been achieved. Well, if you've achieved your goals, then you're going to offer incentives to the other side to continue to play by the rules you have set. Mm-hmm. So while we are very far from anything that we would want in terms of denuclearization, actually the Chinese cleverly got what they wanted in these negotiations.
Mm-hmm. And Colonel Maxwell, with the termination of Jisomia, the landscape in Northeast Asia could have changed a little bit. So how would China make the most out of this latest situation?
Well, I think, they probably will follow Napoleon's dictum and say that if your enemy's making a mistake, don't interrupt him. And they're seeing the friction among the three friends and allies of the U.S., China, and Japan, or the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. And that's really in their interest. A breakdown in relations among the allies serves North Korea and China. And so I think that they're happy, and I think probably what Dennis was talking about, the statement that things have calmed down, I think that they're not put off by the short-range provocations, the missiles, but actually North Korea may believe that that they're able to attack what KCNA calls the fat target, Camp Humphreys, Osan Air Base, Cheongju Air Base, where the F-35s are. That gives them an advantage in future negotiations if they ever come to working level talks, and all of that contributes to destabilizing the alliance, the ROK-US alliance, and the trilateral relationship. And so I think that is probably perceived in China's benefit.
And Professor Wilder, United States and China are in a trade war right now, and how would that affect China's help or cooperation in trying to denuclearize North Korea?
Right. Well, I think, to be very frank with you, this is a price we pay on the trade war. The United States has made very wise decisions to push China on the trade questions because China has not been a good actor on the international stage as far as its economic policies and its trade policies. And there's a long list. Peter Navarro calls it the 7 deadly sins of China. I won't go through the 7 deadly sins, but there's good reason for that. But you have to understand in diplomacy that when you take a tough stand with another government, they're not going to do you too many favors. And I think what we see at this point, certainly with the way the Chinese are supporting the North Koreans, as we've discussed already today, the Chinese aren't going to help us very much. For example, there is clearly a series of violations continuing as far as oil shipments into North Korea that violate the UN agreements. Those oil shipments go through Chinese waters. We see no action by the Chinese to inspect those ships, monitor those activities, whereas we try very hard with our allies to monitor that. The Chinese have done nothing to stop that. That's a pretty good indicator that the Chinese aren't really going to help us put maximum pressure on the North Koreans.
Well, and just to add to that, China's allowing North Korean hackers to operate from Chinese territory. Money is passing through Chinese banks. I mean, I think that really is an indication of how much support China is providing to North Korea, and of course not supporting UN Security Council resolutions, sanctions, and the like. So I think that really is an indication. China's allowing North Korea to get away with an awful lot that keeps them their ability to survive.
Well, China will have to show more responsible actions as a member of the UN Security Council. We'll leave it here and now move on to our next segment.
Great.
Now time for the photo moment, time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. Today we have a photo of Chairman Kim walking into the sea to observe the test firing of his super large multiple rocket launcher. North Korea's state media broadcast Chairman Kim riding a small boat in the wee hours and walking through water to watch the rocket launch. Colonel Maxwell.
Well, I'm sure that North Korean propaganda and agitation department is probably describing this as Kim Jong-un being able to walk on water. But I look at this as that he can't walk unaided, and he needs the help of this naval officer next to him. And again, I look at what is happening with the people around him, but it always makes me think, he's watching the super large rocket, spending millions of dollars on that. He has the money from his illicit economy to feed the Korean people in the north, and he chooses not to. He chooses missiles over the welfare of the Korean people living in the north. And to me, that is a continued crime against humanity.
Professor Wilder?
To me, it strikes me that this kind of propaganda is so out of touch with modern day world. It looks odd to us. It looks odd, I'm sure, to the South Korean people and to everybody else that looks at this kind of photograph. I can't believe that the North Korean people really anymore see this as very compelling. It's a throwback to his grandfather. This is the 21st century, after all, and you wonder just how useful this is. I think it's counterproductive myself.
Well, we'll have to leave it here. Colonel Maxwell, Professor Wilder, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eunjang Cho. Join us next week for more analysis on North Korea.